Rome, 133 BC. A crowd fills the forum, and senators move toward one man, faces twisted with fury and open contempt. His name was Tiberius Gracchus, and his crime was proposing a law that would give ordinary Roman farmers back a small piece of land. Within minutes, he lost his life, along with hundreds of his own supporters, at the hands of the men sworn to govern the Republic. What could possibly drive Rome's own ruling class to turn on one of their own over something as simple as a plot of farmland? To understand that, you first need to understand exactly how land quietly became Rome's most guarded, most fiercely protected form of raw political power. Rome's small farmers had once formed the backbone of both the army and the Republic, each man owning a modest plot feeding his family. But endless wars demanded years away from home, and while these men fought, their small, untended fields quietly fell into ruin and total neglect. Wealthy senators quietly bought up these abandoned, struggling farms for almost nothing, slowly expanding into vast private estates called latifundia across the entire countryside. These new estates were worked not by struggling small farmers, but by enslaved labor. Cheaper, more profitable, and far more permanently reliable for owners. The very soldiers defending Rome's distant borders were quietly losing the land back home that was meant to sustain their own waiting families forever. Displaced farmers flooded into the city of Rome itself, landless and jobless, crowding into narrow streets with genuinely nowhere else left to go now. This growing landless mass became a volatile, hungry population, no longer tied to the countryside, the army, or the old Republic's traditional social structure. Enter Tiberius Gracchus, a young, reform-minded Roman tribune, proposing something remarkably simple: cap how much public land any single man could legally hold. Any land held beyond that legal limit would be redistributed to poor, landless Roman citizens, quietly restoring the old Republic's original founding balance completely. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. This law didn't even seize private property. It only enforced a limit long ignored for generations. Yet the Senate reacted as though Tiberius had personally threatened to burn the entire city of Rome down to smoking ground and gray ash. Because the wealthiest senators, quietly occupying vast tracts of public land for generations, stood to lose the very most under this brand new law. They mobilized quickly, publicly painted him as a dangerous tyrant seeking king-like power, and turned an angry mob against their own reformer instead. On the day of the vote, in 133 BC, senators and allies stormed the assembly, and chaos erupted almost instantly there. Tiberius and hundreds of his supporters lost their lives that day, their bodies quietly cast into the Tiber River before nightfall arrived fully there. A decade later, his own younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, tried the exact same reform again, expanding it further, and met the exact same fate. Gaius too was pursued relentlessly and ultimately met the same fate, with a bounty reportedly paid in gold for whoever finally brought him down. Two brothers, two separate attempts at genuine land reform, two silenced reformers, the Senate's message now unmistakably clear across the entire Roman Republic itself. Touch the land quietly held by the wealthy, and you will not live long enough to see any reform actually finished, passed, or enforced. Here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. The underlying land crisis itself was never truly solved by either brother's downfall or personal sacrifice. The latifundia estates kept steadily growing, and small independent farms kept quietly disappearing, decade after decade, generation after generation, with almost no real pause. Within a century, most Roman farmland had concentrated into the hands of a shrinking elite, a small handful of increasingly powerful, wealthy old families. Ordinary Romans, permanently locked out of land ownership entirely, became fully dependent on the government's free grain dole just to survive another single day. Those who once proudly owned land quietly became renters, tenants, or laborers on estates now owned by men who never worked the soil themselves. Land had quietly become Rome's ultimate form of raw power, more valuable, more fiercely contested than gold, than titles, than any military rank itself. And the people who already firmly owned that land made absolutely certain that owning more of it stayed nearly impossible for everyone else around. What looked, on the surface, like simple economics was actually a deliberate, quiet defense of existing wealth and deeply entrenched political power, carefully hidden. The wealthy didn't even need to break a single law to keep this system firmly in place. They simply enforced the rules protecting them. The same senators writing Rome's own laws were the very same men who personally benefited most from those exact laws staying completely unchanged forever. Two brothers died trying to publicly point this simple fact out, and Rome, given a clear choice, quietly chose comfort over painful correction instead. Historians still fiercely argue whether Rome's later, slower decline traces directly back to this exact unresolved land crisis sitting quietly at its own root. What began as simple, unequal ownership of farmland slowly hollowed out the very Roman middle class that had originally built the entire republic itself. An empire that once proudly stood on citizen farmer soldiers increasingly relied instead on a landless, dependent, restless population with nothing left to lose. And here's the truly unsettling part nobody enjoys discussing openly. None of this ever required banks, mortgages, or any form of modern real estate. It only ever required one very old, very human instinct: protect what you already firmly own, especially from those who currently have far less. Centuries later, feudal Europe rediscovered this exact same pattern, land concentrated in the hands of lords, while peasants worked it without ever owning it. Different century, different continent, different title, yet somehow the exact same divide: those who own land and those who simply pay to live there. That divide survived kingdoms, revolutions, and entire empires, quietly reshaping itself into whatever form each new era's economy happened to demand at the time. Fast forward to today, to your own city, standing exactly where this 2,000-year-old story finally catches up with your own life. You did everything right. No debt at all, steady income, years of careful saving, and still, somehow, no house within reach of your budget. Most people blame simple supply and demand, but that explanation barely scratches the real surface, hiding beneath your own local housing market entirely today. In many modern cities, outdated zoning rules make it genuinely difficult to build enough new housing fast enough to meet the growing local demand. Here's the uncomfortable modern twist. The people quietly blocking new housing nearby are often already comfortable homeowners themselves, protecting their own rising property value. Existing homeowners frequently fight new construction nearby, because scarcity is exactly what keeps their own home's value quietly climbing, year after year, forever now. In other words, the very housing system meant to shelter everyone quietly rewards those who actively limit new housing from ever being built nearby. Sound familiar? Roman senators once blocked land reform to protect their own estates. Modern homeowners now block new housing to protect their own equity. In some markets, large investment companies have quietly been buying thousands of single-family homes, treating them purely as long-term financial investments now. Building a new home today costs dramatically more than it did just one single decade ago, thanks to pricier materials, labor, and endless permits. Meanwhile, fewer young workers are entering the construction industry at all, compared to previous generations, further slowing how quickly new housing can be built. So the gap between how many homes we genuinely need and how many we actually build keeps quietly widening, year after year, without pause. You're no longer just competing against another family for that same home. You're now competing against an entire corporations holding billions of dollars ready now. When interest rates climbed sharply, most existing homeowners simply stopped selling entirely, refusing to trade a cheap old mortgage for an expensive new one. Experts quietly call this effect golden handcuffs, and it froze huge portions of the housing market, exactly the way frozen Roman farmland once did. For some wealthy buyers, a home isn't really a home at all. It's treated more like a vault, quietly storing enormous amounts of wealth. In some major cities, entire buildings now sit largely empty, owned but rarely lived in, purely to preserve capital rather than shelter actual people. Short-term rental platforms let owners earn far more nightly then renting to a family long-term, pulling even more homes out of reach. So this isn't only about how many homes exist, it's about how those existing homes actually get used and who they're truly serving now. Government policy quietly nudges this system too, tax rules rewarding bigger, more expensive homes, and local governments profiting when nearby home values keep climbing. So the very government meant to fix housing affordability often quietly benefits when housing prices keep rising, instead of ever actually falling back down. There's no single villain here, just a system where nearly every powerful participant quietly benefits from housing staying scarce, expensive, and out of reach. That's exactly why simply saying build more homes badly oversimplifies a much deeper, tangled structural problem stretching back 2,000 years, still fully unresolved. Many people secretly hope for another housing crash. But even after the crash of 2008, prices fully recovered within just 1 decade. It wasn't really a fix. It was a painful crisis that destroyed savings, jobs, and entire neighborhoods without solving the underlying land problem itself. What actually shifts this system happens slowly, through gradual zoning reform, generational transfers of wealth, and shifting patterns of remote and hybrid work today. Still, none of this brings back the affordable prices many people remember from just a decade ago, no matter how patiently they choose waiting. So here's the real question, the one that should genuinely unsettle you more than any single housing headline or news report ever quietly could. We have understood this exact pattern for 2,000 documented years: farmland, feudal land, and mortgages. So why hasn't it ever truly, fully disappeared? Because the people who benefit most from scarce, expensive land are almost always the very same people who hold the power to change it. The Gracchi brothers could not defeat this pattern even with genuine reform and personal sacrifice. Modern zoning boards have not defeated it with policy. 2,000 years ago, a reformer was silenced in a crowded Roman forum for simply trying to redistribute unused, hoarded farmland more fairly still. Today, you face no mob and no senate, only a listing that keeps climbing. Yet that same ancient mechanism quietly hums beneath it now. So the real skill was never waiting patiently for prices to fall, because history shows us plainly that they almost never truly do that. The real skill is recognizing the pattern for exactly what it is, a story 2,000 years in the making, still being written today. You're not simply buying a house. You're quietly buying into a system that Roman senators, feudal lords, and modern homeowners all helped quietly design. And once you understand that system, you stop waiting for luck and start planning around a reality that has been true for 2 millennia.